The year is 1947, in a clandestine Soviet laboratory. Whispers of a chilling experiment to conquer sleep begin to surface. This experiment, shrouded in secrecy, would be known as the Russian sleep experiment. Did this macabre experiment truly transpire in a Soviet lab? The story revolves around 5 political prisoners promised freedom in exchange for their participation. Their prison, a hermetically sealed chamber, designed to isolate them and subject them to relentless scrutiny. The goal? To observe the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation on the human psyche. The subjects were prisoners of war, men who had been captured in the heat of battle, their fates now uncertain and their futures bleak. These individuals, once soldiers fighting for their countries, now found themselves at the mercy of their captors. Stripped of their freedom and dignity, they were herded like cattle into makeshift camps, surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by armed soldiers. The harsh reality of their new existence began to set in as they realized they were no longer seen as human beings, but as mere pawns in a larger, more sinister game. Deemed expendable by the regime, these men were subjected to the most inhumane conditions imaginable. The camps were neglected, with little regard for the well-being of the detainees. Food and water were scarce, and medical care was virtually non-existent. The prisoners were left to fend for themselves in an environment that was both physically and mentally taxing. The isolation and neglect took a toll on their spirits, leaving them feeling abandoned and forgotten by the world. These men, ripped from their homes and families, now faced a new kind of horror. The trauma of being forcibly taken from everything they knew and loved was compounded by the brutal conditions of the camps. They were haunted by memories of their past lives, and the uncertainty of their future weighed heavily on their minds. The constant fear of what might happen next was a burden they carried with them every day. Now, in this bleak and desolate environment, they faced a new kind of horror. The fear and uncertainty of their situation were palpable, and the men were constantly on edge. They had no idea what their captors had planned for them, and the lack of information only added to their anxiety. The once proud soldiers were now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, their spirits broken by the relentless cruelty of their captors. Their identities lost to time, these men were reduced to mere numbers. Stripped of their names and any sense of individuality, they became faceless entities in the eyes of their captors. The dehumanization was complete, and the prisoners were left to grapple with the loss of their sense of self. The once vibrant and unique individuals were now just another number in a long list of detainees, their personal histories erased by the cruelty of their captors. They were reduced to numbers, each one a mere statistic in the eyes of the regime. The numbered tags they wore were a constant reminder of their dehumanized state. The men were no longer seen as individuals with their own stories and experiences, but as interchangeable parts in a larger machine. The loss of their identities was a profound and devastating blow, one that left them feeling even more isolated and alone. We can imagine their fear and confusion as they were led into the sterile chamber. The uncertainty of what awaited them was a source of constant anxiety. The men were filled with dread, their minds racing with thoughts of what might happen next. The sterile, clinical environment of the chamber only added to their sense of unease as they were confronted with the unknown. As they were led into the sterile chamber, the men could feel the weight of their fear and confusion. The ominous structure loomed before them, a symbol of the unknown horrors that awaited them inside. The prisoners were filled with a sense of foreboding, their minds racing with thoughts of what might happen next. The sterile, clinical environment of the chamber only added to their sense of unease as they were confronted with the unknown. They were pawns in a game they did not understand. Sealed within the chamber, their ordeal was just beginning. The men were left to grapple with the reality of their situation, their minds filled with questions and fears. The chamber was a place of isolation and confinement, a stark contrast to the open spaces they had once known. The prisoners were left to wonder what their captors had planned for them, and the uncertainty of their fate was a constant source of anxiety. Their ordeal was just beginning. The men were trapped in a desolate environment, their fate uncertain. The harsh conditions of the camp were only the beginning of their suffering, as they were subjected to further cruelty and inhumanity. The prisoners were left to wonder what their captors had planned for them, and the uncertainty of their fate was a constant source of anxiety. The once proud soldiers were now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, their spirits broken by the relentless cruelty of their captors. The air, thick with stimulant gas, crackled with silent anticipation. The scientists watched, eager to witness the unraveling of the human psyche. The prisoners were subjected to a new kind of torment as the gas filled their lungs and minds. The scientists observed from a distance, their eyes fixed on the men as they struggled to cope with the effects of the gas. The prisoners were left to grapple with the reality of their situation, their minds filled with questions and fears. Eager to witness the unraveling of the human psyche, the scientists watched from a distance. Their eyes were fixed on the prisoners, eager to see how they would react to the stimulant gas. The men were left to grapple with the effects of the gas, their minds filled with questions and fears. The scientists observed with a detached curiosity, their interest in the prisoners' suffering purely academic. The men were left to wonder what their captors had planned for them, and the uncertainty of their fate was a constant source of anxiety. The first few days passed without incident. The subjects, a diverse group of individuals, were initially at ease in their new environment. The serene surroundings and the promise of freedom created a sense of calm and cooperation among them. The subjects, buoyed by the promise of freedom, cooperated with the experiment. They engaged in conversations, shared stories, and built a sense of camaraderie. The atmosphere was almost festive, with laughter and smiles abundant. They talked, ate, and performed tasks, oblivious to the horrors awaiting them. Meals were shared with enthusiasm, and tasks were completed with a sense of purpose. The subjects felt a sense of normalcy, unaware of the subtle changes beginning to take place. The scientists noted every move, word, and flicker of emotion. They meticulously recorded data, observing the subjects' interactions and behaviors. Every smile, every frown, every gesture was documented with precision. Subtle changes in mood and focus were observed. The subjects began to show signs of restlessness and slight irritability. These changes were minor but noticeable to the keen eyes of the researchers. The stimulant gas was slowly altering their perceptions, amplifying fears and sowing paranoia. The once clear and serene environment began to feel oppressive. The subjects' conversations grew more tense and their laughter less frequent. The scientists saw only data points, missing the warning signs. They were engrossed in their observations and analyses, failing to notice the growing unease among the subjects. The data was their primary focus, blinding them to the human element. The chamber was transforming into a pressure cooker of psychological torment. The atmosphere grew heavier, and the subjects' anxiety levels rose. The once peaceful environment now felt like a trap, with no escape in sight. The subjects clung to the hope of freedom, their voices growing desperate. They tried to maintain their composure, but the strain was evident. The promise of freedom, once a source of comfort, now felt like a distant dream. By the fifth day, a palpable shift occurred. The subjects grew withdrawn, their conversations laced with suspicion. The stimulant eroded their sanity, whispers of paranoia began, trust crumbled, and then came the screaming. One subject, driven to the brink, ranted and accused his comrades. The others reacted with fear and aggression, escalating the chaos. The chamber descended into chaos, thick with fear and desperation. The scientists watched in horrified fascination as the experiment spiraled out of control. The stage was set for a descent into madness. By day 15, the subjects had descended into a primal state. They resorted to self-mutilation, their bodies canvases of madness. The chamber was smeared with blood and feces, a testament to their depravity. The screaming ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. The scientists, pale with horror, huddled around the monitors. Driven by morbid curiosity, they decided to open the chamber. A team of soldiers, armed and wary, approached the door. What they found inside would forever haunt their nightmares. The scene that greeted the soldiers was horrific. The chamber was a scene of unimaginable carnage. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, in a manner of speaking. Their bodies were emaciated, their eyes filled with terror and madness. They were no longer human, driven by a primal need to survive. The soldiers moved cautiously, their weapons trained on the subjects. The subjects seemed oblivious, lost in their own private hells. They had turned on each other, driven by a madness that knew no bounds. The soldiers encountered fierce resistance from the remaining subjects. The subjects fought back with a ferocity born of desperation. One by one, they succumbed to the soldiers' restraints, but one subject continued to fight, his eyes blazing with intensity. It took several soldiers to subdue him, fueling his rage. He bit, scratched, and thrashed, his screams echoing through the chamber. As they strapped him to a gurney, he finally spoke. "We no longer want to be freed," he rasped. The last surviving subject was wheeled away, his fate uncertain. The story of the Russian sleep experiment has captivated imaginations. But is it true? The answer is shrouded in ambiguity. There is no official record, no documentation to prove or disprove its existence. Skeptics argue it's a fictional horror story designed to shock. Yet, the story persists, its grip on our collective imagination, refusing to loosen. Perhaps it is the story's plausibility that makes it so enduring. The Russian sleep experiment serves as a reminder of real horrors inflicted in the name of science. This fictional tale, though terrifying, draws eerie parallels to actual events in history where human lives were sacrificed on the altar of scientific progress. The 20th century is replete with examples of unethical experiments. During this period, the rapid advancements in science and technology often came at a grave human cost. Researchers driven by curiosity or ideology sometimes crossed moral boundaries, leading to devastating consequences. The Nazis conducted countless experiments on prisoners in concentration camps. These experiments were often brutal and inhumane, involving everything from exposure to extreme temperatures to the testing of chemical weapons. The suffering endured by the victims is a stark reminder of the perils of dehumanizing others in the name of research. The Japanese unit, 731, subjected prisoners to unspeakable horrors. This covert biological and chemical warfare research unit conducted experiments that included vivisections, forced infections, and other gruesome procedures. The legacy of Unit 731 is a chilling testament to the depths of cruelty that can be reached when ethical considerations are abandoned. The Tuskegee syphilis study stands as a shameful example of medical racism. For decades, African American men were misled and denied proper treatment for syphilis, all in the name of studying the disease's progression. This gross violation of trust and human rights highlights the dangers of prejudice and discrimination in scientific research. These experiments remind us of the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition. When the pursuit of knowledge overrides ethical considerations, the results can be catastrophic. It is crucial to remember that scientific progress should never come at the expense of human dignity and rights. The Russian sleep experiment forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths. Though a work of fiction, it echoes the real-life atrocities that have occurred throughout history. It serves as a stark warning of what can happen when ethical boundaries are ignored. We must learn from the past to ensure such horrors are never repeated. By acknowledging and understanding these dark chapters in history, we can strive to build a future where scientific inquiry is guided by compassion, respect, and a commitment to the well-being of all humanity.